My name is Jordan Harris, and this story doesn't start with rage or revenge. It starts with confusion. A soft kind, the type that creeps up on you like fog rolling in over the street. You don't see it coming. And by the time you do, you're already surrounded. I was 26 when I moved back home after college, ambitious but a little lost like most postgrads trying to build their lives brick by brick. My parents, Leonard and Michelle Harris, lived in a beautiful 5-bedroom colonial-style home in upstate New York. Cream-colored siding, wraparound porch, wind chimes on the corner that made a ghostly melody when the breeze came through. It had been my childhood home. Safe, familiar, until it wasn't. The first week back was fine. Pleasant even. My mother made her famous sweet potato casserole on my first night, and my father asked me about jobs and internships like he actually cared. But underneath their smiles was something stiff, something rehearsed. I chalked it up to the adjustment. They weren't used to having me back, and I wasn't used to feeling like a guest in my own house. The first sign that something was off came about 10 days after I'd settled in. I was heading down to the basement to look for an old photo album. The basement was always my favorite place growing up. It had this strange warmth to it, even with the concrete floors and boxes stacked high with old holiday decorations. It smelled like dust and cedarwood. But as I flicked on the light and stepped down, I noticed something odd. All of my childhood boxes, the ones I had packed and labeled before going off to college, were gone. Every single one. The box marked Jordan, high school stuff.
Gone.
Jordan, art supplies.
Gone.
Even my old trophies and the shoebox full of letters I'd written but never sent, they weren't just moved. They had disappeared. I stood in the middle of the basement, heart picking up speed, trying to reason with it. Maybe Mom cleaned up. Maybe Dad moved them to the garage. But something about the emptiness felt deliberate. Like I was being erased. I walked upstairs, casually asking my mom if she knew where my boxes had gone. She was standing at the kitchen island, chopping bell peppers, her face lit with that brittle smile she wore when she was pretending everything was okay. "Oh, honey, I think we donated some of it a while back. You know, when you left for college, we didn't think you'd want all that clutter." Clutter. That's what she called my memories. My life. My stomach turned. I nodded slowly, pretending it didn't bother me. But something about the way she didn't meet my eyes stuck with me. She kept chopping those peppers like the conversation hadn't even happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the twin bed in my old room, now weirdly stripped down, like a hotel room that was waiting for the next guest. The posters were gone. The desk was gone. The photos that used to line my bookshelf were gone too. Instead, there were new linens. Beige and sterile. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just my anxiety. After all, people change things. Parents downsize. Maybe they were just trying to move forward. But the unease didn't go away. It crawled up the back of my neck every time I walked into the kitchen and saw my father quickly closing his laptop. Every time I heard whispers behind their door and the sudden silence when I got close. Every time I noticed how no one called me by any nicknames anymore. They started calling me Jordan, flat and formal. Never Jordy. Never kiddo. Just Jordan. Like a stranger. The second small crack came at breakfast 3 days later. We were sitting at the table. My dad was reading the newspaper and my mom was scrolling on her tablet. "So, I've been looking at a few job listings downtown," I said, trying to make conversation. "There's a position at Langford Realty, assistant to the senior acquisitions manager. It's a start." My mother didn't even look up. My dad gave a non-committal grunt. Real estate's a tough business. Especially if you don't have the right backing. Backing. Support, he said, folding the paper. Connections. That sort of thing. There was something about the way he said it. Cold. Almost dismissive. "I can make connections," I replied defensively. "I'm not asking for a handout." "Didn't say you were," he said. Then he got up and walked out of the room. I glanced at my mom, hoping for some kind of reassurance. But she was still tapping away at her tablet, avoiding eye contact. That same afternoon, I found out something that almost made me laugh. While digging through the junk drawer looking for a pen, I found an envelope addressed to Ethan Harris. Same last name. Same address. Same house. Ethan was my cousin. My younger cousin, 23, still in college. We used to build Lego castles together every Thanksgiving. And apparently, he was now receiving mail at our house. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. Was he staying here? Was he moving in? Why hadn't they said anything? I walked straight to the living room where my mom was watching her soaps. Is Ethan staying here? I asked, holding up the envelope. She looked up slowly, blinked, and then smiled. Yes, he'll be coming for the summer. Just needs a place to stay while he interns with your father. I froze. Interns with Dad? She nodded, like it was the most normal thing in the world. So, is he staying in the guest room? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, she said, her voice calm. He'll be in your room. Silence spread through the room like a sickness. In my room? I repeated. Well, it's cleaner. And he's allergic to dust. The guest room isn't great for him. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was I even supposed to say? I went back upstairs that night and stared at my suitcase for hours. I hadn't even unpacked properly. Maybe a part of me already knew I didn't belong there. The next morning, something tipped me over the edge. I came downstairs and found my dad talking with a realtor. He didn't know I was home early. I stood on the last step, just out of sight, listening. I'd like to have the appraisal finalized by next week, my father said. Once the deed transfer is official, we'll prepare for occupancy. Occupancy? Deed transfer? The words hit me like a blow to the chest. They were signing over the house. To Ethan. My cousin was replacing me. I stood frozen. A cold rage started to spread inside me. But I didn't march into the room. I didn't confront him. I turned around quietly and went back upstairs. That was the moment it stopped feeling like confusion. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just weird behavior. It wasn't just miscommunication. It was deliberate. They wanted me gone. They had already decided I didn't belong. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. My face looked pale, foreign. This wasn't my home anymore. And somewhere deep inside, a seed planted itself. I wouldn't fight to stay. No. I would leave. And one day, I'd come back. I didn't leave that day. Not yet. But everything changed after what I heard on the stairs. I began to observe, not just listen, not just hear, but really watch. And when you start watching people closely, especially those you trust, you begin to see them for who they are. Or who they've become. My parents no longer treated me like their child. They treated me like an inconvenience. An extra chair at the dinner table. A reminder of something they were trying to erase. I started picking up on the smallest details. Averted glances when I entered the room. The way their voices lowered when they talked behind closed doors. My dad started locking his office door, something he'd never done before. The most chilling thing was how quickly things were moving. It was like I'd already been erased. The documents for the house transfer weren't a plan. They were nearly finalized. I could feel it in their urgency. And then Ethan arrived. He walked into the house with a duffel bag and a wide, polite smile, completely unaware, or pretending to be, of the chaos he'd stepped into. Jordan, he said brightly, as if everything was fine. Didn't know I'd be seeing you here. I nodded. Didn't know you were moving into my room. He laughed. Yeah, Aunt Michelle said you'd probably be moving out soon. Something about a new job or place. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just my imagination. They had already told him I was leaving. They had spoken about me in past tense, as if I didn't live there, as if I was already gone. I smiled tightly. Yeah, something like that. He settled in fast, too fast. Within days, he had all his stuff in my closet. My things were boxed and shoved into the attic like they never mattered. My mom repainted the room. Soft gray. Neutral. Lifeless. The next few weeks felt like I was living in a movie, one where I was slowly being written out of the script. They had crafted the perfect narrative. Jordan was drifting, unfocused, uncertain. Ethan was driven, polite, and eager to learn. I became the ghost. But I wasn't invisible, not to myself. I started recording things, writing them down, cataloging the quiet betrayals. One afternoon, I Overheard my mother talking to someone on the phone. She's just not like Ethan. He has direction.
Drive.
She always needed a little more help.
She.
Not Jordan. Just she. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a liability. A placeholder. My hands shook as I pressed my ear against the door more tightly. I heard her sigh. We just want what's best for the house. For the family name. Leonard thinks she'll be happier elsewhere. Elsewhere? Like I was a couch that didn't match the decor anymore. That night, I confronted my father lightly.
I didn't want to explode.
Not yet. I walked into his office while he was reading reports. Dad, are you planning something with the house? He looked up at me, eyes guarded. Why? I just overheard Mom talking to someone. And Ethan staying in my room. And I saw an envelope about deed transfers. I just want to understand. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Jordan, this house has always been an asset. Your grandfather built it to be part of the family legacy. It's not about ownership. It's about stewardship. I frowned. So, why can't I be the one to steward it? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Ethan's proven himself. He's been studying business. He has goals. He's practical. And I'm not. He hesitated for half a second too long. You've been lost for a while, he said. We just think it's time you found your own way. Somewhere new. Somewhere new. It hit me like a gut punch. They weren't just nudging me, they were pushing. That night, I stayed up late, scrolling through my old emails, trying to make sense of everything. And that's when I found it. An email from 3 months ago, unopened. Subject: Home insurance renewal. Sender: Leonard Harris. I opened it. Inside was a scanned document. A policy renewal. But the beneficiary section had changed. My name was gone. Replaced with Ethan Harris. It wasn't just the deed. They were slowly transferring everything: the insurance, the ownership, even family heirlooms. I found a box missing from the attic. The one with my grandmother's old pearls. My mother had once promised them to me.
Gone.
I started feeling like I couldn't breathe. Like the walls were closing in. Every glance, every silence, every locked drawer, it all screamed you don't belong. I tried to stay calm. I needed to know why. Why the betrayal? Why Ethan? I dug deeper. I started watching how they treated him. My dad took him to meetings. My mom cooked his favorite meals. They laughed more around him. Acted younger, like he reminded them of better days. It wasn't about Ethan being better. It was about him being easier. He never questioned them. Never challenged them. I did. I was the artist. The emotional one. The questioner. The one who wanted to travel and build something on my own terms. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a reflection of themselves. And Ethan? He gave them that. One evening, I found something that made my stomach twist. A letter. Half shredded in the trash. It was addressed to my mother. From a legal advisor. Quiet title transfer agreement. I pulled out the shreds and pieced them together, one by one. The letter discussed removing potential heir claims to the property title. My claim. Without ever notifying me. Just quietly making sure I had no rights. I stared at the reconstructed letter for hours, heart pounding. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I started planning. Not for revenge, not yet. But for survival. It wasn't long before the final nudge came. I came home late one Friday after a job interview. It had gone surprisingly well. A tech startup in the city. They liked me. Wanted a second round. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Until I reached the porch. My key didn't work. I tried again. Turned it. Nothing. I knocked. No answer. After 5 minutes, the door creaked open. My mother stood there in her robe. "Oh," she said. "You're back." My key isn't working." She tilted her head slightly. "We had the locks changed. For security reasons." Without telling me? Her eyes were blank. "You've been coming and going so much. We weren't sure if you were still living here." I stood frozen, drenched in cold night air, my hands trembling at my sides. "I still have clothes here. My things.
We packed some of it, she said.
It's in the garage. It was over. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I picked up the box from the garage. Just one. The rest could burn. As I walked down the driveway, the air felt sharper.
Cleaner.
I wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside me had shifted. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten rid of me. But they didn't know me at all. 2 weeks after they changed the locks on me, I signed my first contract. It wasn't for a dream job or a glamorous opportunity. It was for a temporary assistant role at Vance and Company, a real estate development firm in the city. It wasn't flashy, but it was close to the kind of power I needed to learn about. Revenge stories usually start after the final blow. Mine started with quiet humiliation. I slept on a friend's couch for the first few nights, then moved into a shared studio with 2 other people. Rent was tight. Privacy was a joke. But I had space to think,
To feel.
and to plot. For a while, I buried myself in work. I learned the business. I shadowed people, asked questions, stayed late. I absorbed everything: legal frameworks, property law, escrow processes, ownership loopholes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what I needed. One afternoon, I was tasked with scanning and organizing a backlog of title documents for newly acquired estates. Boring work. But as I flipped through legal descriptions and deed language, something made me stop. There it was. The name, Harris Property Trust. My family home. My eyes scanned the page like I was trying to break code. Property owner, Leonard Harris. Trustee successor, pending Ethan Harris. Transfer date, July 17th. Clause reference, quiet transfer under Family Trust Act Section 122B. My blood went cold. It was done. The house had been signed over. Legally. Without contest. And I was nowhere in the paperwork. I swallowed the lump in my throat and copied the page. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed it.
Proof.
That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my tiny desk in the dark studio apartment, staring at the printed copy, running my fingers over the ink. They had actually done it. They didn't just remove me. They rewrote the story to pretend I was never even part of it. I thought about confronting them, about showing up at the house and demanding an explanation. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I started collecting. Every Friday evening for the next month, I stayed late at the office and sifted through tax records, court filings, real estate transactions. I found everything. The trust had been restructured 6 months before I came home. That meant they had planned it. Before I even stepped foot in the house. Ethan's name had been added to multiple properties. Small ones at first, a family cabin, a rental unit, even stock dividends from a small investment property my father managed. They weren't just giving him the house. They were building his empire, with a fortune they said didn't exist. The one I wouldn't understand. My mother had always told me we weren't rich, that the house was the only asset left, that the land didn't mean much anymore.
Lies.
The truth? We were land rich, generational wealth hidden in shell companies and trusts. And I had been erased from all of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in the form of an envelope I received 3 weeks later. It was from a law firm. Harris, Lormond and Grace. The letter inside was brief. Dear Ms. Jordan Harris, we are writing to formally inform you that your presence at the Harris estate is no longer authorized. Any attempt to claim legal stake in the property known as 7 Burwood Lane will be considered trespassing, as the property is now solely owned by Mr. Ethan Harris. Sincerely, Robert Lormond, ESQ. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They had gone out of their way to legally bar me from returning to the house. Like I was a stranger. Like I was dangerous. I sat there, gripping the letter so hard it tore at the edges. And something in me, something dormant, woke up. No more hoping. No more questioning. I was going to take everything back. It took a year. But in that year, I transformed. I worked 3 jobs. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I studied for my real estate license and passed it. I began investing, not in homes, but in land, vacant parcels, forgotten commercial lots. Bank-owned deals. I partnered with mentors who didn't care about my last name, only my grit. By the time I was 28, I had co-founded my own holding company, Cypress and Stone Holdings. It was small at first, but it gave me leverage and a name to attach to my offers. Then it happened. One rainy Tuesday, I got a forwarded property listing from a broker I worked with. He said, "I thought you'd find this poetic." I opened the attachment, and my breath caught. 7 Burwood Lane. Appraised value, $1.7 million. Bank foreclosure status, active. They lost it. They had let the taxes lapse. Probably took on more debt than they could manage. Probably thought Ethan's startup would float everything. It didn't. The house was in foreclosure. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, barely able to breathe. This wasn't luck. This was fate. I moved fast. Made the offer within 24 hours under a partner name. No connection to me. All legal. All above board. The bank accepted. The house was mine. 3 weeks later, I pulled into the long driveway at 7 Burwood Lane. The trees rustled overhead, and the wind chimes on the porch made that same hollow song. The house looked tired now.
Paint peeling.
Gutters full. Porch, steps cracked. But it was still standing. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door with the keys in hand. For the first time in years, they worked.
Click.
I opened the door and stepped inside. Silence. The walls were bare. The floors scuffed. But every creak, every echo, it was mine now. I walked slowly through the rooms. Past the kitchen island where my mom once chopped bell peppers. Past the stairs where I overheard my father selling my future away. Past the hallway where Ethan greeted me like a polite stranger. I stood in the living room and let the silence settle in. Then I sat down on the floor, cross-legged, hands in my lap, and I smiled, because the truth was no longer painful. It was proof. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Jordan." The voice was cautious. "Ethan." He paused. "I heard you bought the house?" "I did."
He sighed.
"Look, I don't know what happened with my internship or the business stuff. I just followed Uncle Leonard's lead. I didn't mean for you to get erased." He paused again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Erased." There was a long silence between us. Years of unspoken things resting heavy on the line. Then I said, "Tell them they can stop pretending I never existed."
Click.
The confrontation wasn't cinematic. There was no thunder in the background. No slammed doors. It happened in the middle of a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was at my house, finishing up some measurements with a contractor. The plan was to renovate it, turn it into a space that had nothing to do with them. No memories. Just clean slate. But as I stepped out onto the front porch, clipboard in hand, a black sedan pulled up the drive. And out stepped my mother, Michelle Harris. Hair perfect as ever. That same neutral lipstick. That same beige coat she wore when she wanted to look respectable. For a second, I didn't move. She climbed the steps slowly, her heels clicking against the weather-worn wood. I noticed she hesitated when she saw me standing there, really saw me. Not the child version of me.
Me. Now.
"Jordan," she said, her voice carefully measured. I didn't answer right away. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked. She exhaled. "Ethan told us. About the house. That you bought it." "I did," I said. "Legally. Clean title. Full purchase." There was something about saying that, owning it, that felt good. Final. "I see," she said, her eyes drifting across the porch, the chipped paint, the stacked boxes waiting to be hauled out. "I guess that's yours now." "It always should have been," I replied. "Or, at least, you should have said something. Told me the truth." My mother blinked, looking like she might speak, then stopped herself. "Your father didn't want things to be difficult. You were always emotional. We thought it was best to make a clean break." "You mean push me out quietly?" She stiffened. "Don't put words in my mouth." I stepped closer. "Then use your own. Explain it. Why, Ethan? Why cut me out of everything?" She looked away, jaw tight. Because you questioned everything. You pushed back. You had these dreams. Things we didn't understand. And Leonard said we agreed it would be easier to let someone else take over. Someone who wouldn't fight us. I nodded slowly. The truth. Bitter and raw. So you erased me. You left, she snapped. You moved out. You turned your back on us. You changed the locks. I shouted, my voice cracking. You packed my things like I died. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then she looked down. You were always too intense. Always too much. I laughed.
No.
I was just too me. Her lips thinned. And now what? You bought the house. Congratulations. What do you want from us? An apology? Redemption? I want nothing, I said quietly. That's the difference now. I used to want your approval, your love, a seat at your table. I looked around, the wind catching the edge of a loose shutter. The air smelled like pine and dust and memory. But I built my own table, and now I decide who eats at it. My mother said nothing. Her face was unreadable, somewhere between pride and resentment. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. You're stronger than I expected. No, I said. I'm just finally done asking. She turned without another word and descended the porch step slowly, like someone walking away from a grave. And as her car disappeared down the road, I realized something chilling. She hadn't come to apologize. She had come to see for herself if I'd really done it, if I had beaten them. And I had. After my mother left that day, I stood on the porch for a long time. The wind had picked up, brushing through the trees like fingers through tangled hair. I listened to it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She came not with regret, not with humility. She came with calculation, just to see if I had really risen, if I had actually taken everything they once said I didn't deserve. But I had. And somehow that made everything worse. I'd thought revenge would be cleaner, sharper, satisfying. But now, holding the title deed in my hand, standing in a house that echoed with both victory and abandonment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something else. Empty. Not because I wanted them back, but because I realized they were never mine to begin with. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. Contractors. Paint samples. Flooring quotes. I kept myself busy, obsessively so. It was easier to choose backsplash tile than to sit in a house full of ghosts. My friends stopped by here and there. They praised me. You did it, Jordan. You won. They meant well, but they didn't understand. This wasn't a game. It had been my life. One evening, I was clearing out the attic, dust dancing in shafts of gold light, when I found a box labeled in my handwriting, Jordan, do not toss. It was one of the few things that hadn't been discarded. I pulled it down, coughing from the dust, and opened it. Inside were pieces of a different Jordan. Old journals, childhood drawings, birthday cards from people I no longer spoke to. At the bottom, wrapped in faded tissue paper, was a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I saw the handwriting. Grandma Evelyn, my father's mother, the matriarch, the only one who ever truly saw me. She died when I was 16. I remembered crying so hard I threw up. And now, all these years later, her words were back in my hands. I opened it carefully, the paper brittle. My dearest Jordan, I've seen the way you look at this house. Like it's a cage you don't want to hate. I know your parents don't always understand you, but I do. And I want you to know, this house, this family, this legacy, none of it matters without love, without truth. If one day you find yourself alone in these walls, know this. You were never the problem. You were just the only one awake. And sometimes that means being pushed out before you can rise. I love you always. Grandma Evelyn. I sat on the attic floor for a long time, the letter pressed to my chest. She knew. Even back then, she knew. The house was mine, yes. But what good is owning a mansion if it only echoes with what you've lost? I started going through old photo albums trying to make sense of the fractures. And that's when I found something else. buried beneath layers of ignored moments. A picture. A family photo taken when I was 10. My dad standing tall. My mom in her pearls. Me between them. But there was something I hadn't seen before. Standing at the edge of the photo, barely in frame, was a woman I didn't recognize. I looked closer. She was holding a file folder, dressed in gray, face emotionless. And she was staring, not at the camera but at me. The back of the photo had something scribbled in pencil. Home visit, 2004. Home visit? I turned to the next photo. Another one, same event. The woman was gone, but her presence lingered like a fingerprint. I went to the basement and pulled out one of the file boxes I had inherited with the sale. It contained old paperwork, tax documents, household records. And there, tucked in a manila folder, was a case file. Family Services. A referral. My name. Age 10. Suggested evaluation due to suspected emotional instability and frequent questioning of household rules. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Apparently, when I was a child, right around the time I started questioning everything, my parents tried to have me labeled. They thought I was too emotional, too disruptive, not adaptable. They hadn't just disliked me. They had tried to pathologize me. I stared at the file, rage curling in my stomach. All those years, I thought I was the difficult one, that I was the problem. But I wasn't. I was the only one brave enough to call the lie what it was. And they tried to erase me for it. A few nights later, I sat in the living room, the same one where they'd laughed without me, planned without me, moved on without me, and I lit a fire in the hearth. One by one, I fed in the papers. The referral letter. The foreclosure notices. The photos with frozen smiles. The bank documents. Even the old deed. I watched it all burn. Not out of anger, but out of release. They had tried to make me small, but here I was. A woman with a name on a deed. A company under her name. A future not written by her parents, but by her own hand. And then, just as the flames died down, my phone buzzed. A text. From Ethan. They're talking about suing you, saying you manipulated the foreclosure to buy it under market. Just a heads up. They won't stop. I stared at the message. Then, I typed one line back. They already did. Years ago. I just made it official. Weeks passed. The lawsuit never came. They didn't have a legal leg to stand on. But the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. And then came the final twist. One evening, I came home late from the city. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something odd. The porch light was on. I hadn't left it that way. I stepped inside cautiously, flipping on the hallway light. Nothing seemed touched, until I reached the staircase. On the third step, sitting neatly, was an envelope. No name, just a wax seal. Red, like Grandma Evelyn's. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. You think it's over. But you never asked who really funded the trust. Look deeper. You're not the only one with a claim. My pulse spiked. I turned the paper over. Blank. Who had been in my house? I checked the locks. All intact. The cameras? Offline for the past 3 hours. And then I noticed it. In the hallway mirror, drawn faintly into the dust. Awake now. I stood in the silence of my mansion, staring at my reflection. Everything had changed. But maybe the real story was just beginning.